Hey all, here are OS Reviews. Today we're taking a quick look at a pair of TWS True Wireless Buds from Padmate. These are called the Pamu S28. And if you guys have watched some of our other videos, this brand might sound familiar. We've seen quite a few interesting designs from them in the past, such as their quiet ANC buds, other ones throughout the years that have had really interesting customizable kind of covers for their battery case, which were modular and you could decorate. So by contrast, the S28s, even the name, is a pretty low-key design that I've seen from them, but it's also because it's marketed for business, so it has to be a little bit more formal looking and not quite as flashy. But it also has a few interesting characteristics which aren't observable from the photos alone. In fact, only when you pick it up do you realize that the entire body here is made out of aluminum alloy. ENC for reducing noise when you're making phone calls, but it doesn't have active noise cancellation when you're listening to music. And there are two basic EQ or special modes that you can toggle on or off directly on the buds, including a extra bass boosted mode and also a low latency gaming mode. Has everything that you would want in terms of controls directly built on in, including the ability to change the volume higher or lower. There is support for 21 hours with the battery case, which is pretty good for something so small, and then when removed, the buds will last for around 5 hours of continuous music listening. The standard audio codecs here, like SBC and AAC, so there is no support for aptX, for example, but overall, again, for a pair of buds that's going for around 50 bucks, it's also fair, I'd say. Now in here, immediately we can see just how shiny and reflective they are. A quick start guide, which also shows the controls, which as aforementioned can do everything that you would possibly want. USB Type-C charging cable, spare silicone tips, and also a soft carrying pouch. Now a closer look at the casing here, maybe the only downside is because it is metal, it's a little bit more slippery, but overall, again, this thing is super compact. Here it is next to a standard US quarter, just for reference. Also against something like Apple's AirPods, they're even smaller, so very easy to slide into a pocket and take with you when you are on the go. Otherwise, we have just the Type-C port for charging on the back. The door here flips open with a pretty satisfying thunk, and again, even the top hinge is made out of metal. Just very premium looking, I have to say. This dot shape also will remind you of the aforementioned Redmi AirDots, as well as with Samsung's Galaxy Buds, compared to, again, Apple AirPods, which has that longer stem. The back breaks away from the shiny material and just gives you a matte finish, which overall still looks quite good. You pop them in like this, by the way, and they felt pretty snug in terms of the wearing experience, quite ergonomic in terms of the size, and I could kind of walk around, do a little bit of light jogging, and they still stayed in place. And again, super lightweight, so no real stress or strain. Now, of course, the chrome accent on the top there is a little bit of a fingerprint magnet, so you do have to kind of clean it every once in a while. And finally, here is what the mesh looks like. There is a pretty night and day difference compared to the Quiets and their previous generation buds, which is, again, good in terms of compactness, even though it's not as flashy. And like I mentioned before, this one here does not currently support their companion app though, so that is one thing that maybe they can add in the future, although, like I also mentioned, it already has all the controls baked in. Moving into performance and audio quality, overall the S28s don't disappoint. Still preserved the overall sound signature of their previous buds, if that makes sense, which is to say very energetic and lively. So despite the tiny size, these actually are very packed in terms of bass. So if you are a bass head, you actually will like these quite a lot, especially since I found them to be very snug. Whenever you're listening to a drum beat, it really gives it quite a kick and a nice punch there. At the same time, they're very clean, so you won't hear any static, any hissing, or distortion at the background, even at higher volume levels. So very nice when it comes to pop music, EDM music, rock music, all sounded full of character and surprisingly very good in terms of vocals as well as instrumentals. The controls are concerned also were pretty easy to trigger, although that is one thing I will say is to access the dedicated EQ switching, you have to tap on the bud here 4 times. And that particular command can be a little bit tricky. Everything else though was pretty responsive. Even if you're listening to them in the normal mode by turning off the bass boosted effect, it still sounded quite energetic, but slightly more neutral and just giving you a little bit more of emphasis on the mids instead. Now also when it comes to the low latency gaming mode, which you use the right side by the way to trigger, it also worked quite well. So things like watching videos, playing back PUBG, the video and the audio that you're listening to really isn't a problem on these. Finally, moving into call quality, this is the part where I would say it's slightly above average, but also Not necessarily a leader though, compared to the Elovoc Clears that we also reviewed about a month ago. Those had a newer generation ML AI chipset that's dedicated for voice processing. It's perfectly fine if there's a little bit of background chatter when you're indoors. It still tries to focus on your voice and overall sounds clear enough. However, again, the distance between your mouth and the microphone with these buds being so tiny is definitely pretty far, so it's always going to be a little bit tougher just as part of the design. It's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Pamu S28s. For what it is, I do still quite like these buds, especially with the design and build quality of the case. I do think it is quite top-notch in terms of how well it's fit together, although I do think that they could have added maybe active noise cancellation into here at the end of the day, but for what it is, it sounds excellent when it comes to the music. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Pamu S28.